Oh, there he is. All right. Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order. Are we ready? Call to order the Public Works Safety and Finance Committee meeting of January 4th, 2021. Roll call, please, Kristen.
Albertson?
Here.
Bueller?
Here.
Boyer?
Here.
Pauline? Pauline is absent. Lala?
Here.
Manti?
Here.
Radomski?
Here.
Roby?
Here.
Vilhauer?
Here.
Y?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda. A motion by Radomski and a second by Bueller. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is public comment, and that's the time reserved for anyone who would like to make a public comment to step forward and do so. And please state your name for the record. If your comment is related to an agenda item, then please wait until the agenda item is taken up. Is there anyone else online that would like to, or anyone that would like to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. And I think since we've got a couple people in the council chambers that are here for item D, we'll go ahead and move that item to the top.
So moved.
Have a motion by Vilhauer and a second by Y. Any discussion?
Mayor, I would like to let you know I'm recusing myself from A and B, or A and B as printed here.
Okay.
Right.
Councilman Roby?
I'll be recusing myself, potential conflict of interest on item number D.
Okay. Make a note. Thank you. Okay, so we'll do D first, and that is approval of a temporary suspension of the new wastewater utility rate increase from Resolution 20-48, specifically for Dakota Tube, Inc., returning their account to the 2020 wastewater rate and accommodating for a refund or credit for the additional costs incurred to date from the new rate.
So moved.
I have a motion by Vilhauer and a second by Radomski. And I will ask the Public Works Director, City Engineer Heath Von Eye, to tell us about this. Please, Heath.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. And hello to the Public Works commissioners here this evening. This item was brought to staff in relation to our new wastewater utility rates. As you all know, they went into effect here recently and are going to be billed out in January with the new rates for, I believe it's December's usage. But anyway, they're in the process of being rolled out and implemented as we speak. Dakota Tube is one company in Watertown that is known as a significant industrial user. That is one of the categories that our rates are established with. We have the residential rates, we have the commercial rates, and then we have the significant industrial user rates. So they fall into that specific category, what we call the SIU rate category. Dakota Tube approached staff with concerns from whether there should be additional tiers or a different structure on how we charge high level users. Dakota Tube is a high level water user. They are the highest significant industrial user at about 32,000, roughly 32,500 gallons per day. And the second user beneath them is only about a third of that, about 11,000 gallons per day. So effectively what's happened here with our new rates is Dakota Tube has been hit the hardest by the increase on this SIU rate, this significant industrial user rate, and they're seeing about a 20% increase on their 2021 wastewater utility bill. It adds up to approximately a $14,000 annual increase on their wastewater rate. And I guess where we're at tonight is bringing this proposal to the council per the business's request that staff look into this rate structure with our consultant and see if we shouldn't modify this high-end SIU rate to see if there should be a different tiered system or not. That's something staff's more than willing to do with our consultant and try to find some answers to that and see if that's appropriate to consider or not. Now, with all that being said, I've got Mike Berger, wastewater superintendent, Marcy Luno and Justin Peterson, engineering staff that have all helped with the rate study. And then, of course, Councilman Vilhauer and Councilwoman Mantee, and I believe Councilman Albertson as well, have all been involved in discussions with Dakota Tube, and would be glad to help discuss this to any extent that we need to and to help answer any questions.
Thank you, Heath. All right, so we have a committee that went through this through and through, and both Councilwoman Mantee and Councilman Vilhauer were on that committee, and then we met with Dakota Tube personnel. So we have John Steinbauer and Jason Murray are in the audience in case anybody has any questions for them, or if they want to ask any questions. I'll give you an opportunity to do that. Just raise your hand if you want to speak. So how do we want to start this off? Do you have?
I guess I'll say a few words because I was on the committee that brought this forward for our consideration a couple of months ago, and we passed it, and I was one that voted in favor of it. And it wasn't until it was brought to my attention by Mr. Murray, Mr. Steinbauer from Dakota Tube, what the impact would be relative to their business, and then also looking at some expansion plans that they've got in the works that would actually double that impact to them. And then starting to compare that to other industrial users and seeing where they fell on the rostrum of other users, felt that it was, normally I would not be in favor of bringing this forward, reconsidering it, and making an exception for a particular business. But I think their significant usage relative to everybody else that is an industrial user does merit reconsideration. And like the mayor alluded to, we did meet here a couple of weeks ago, and I think the consensus around the table was that, hey, this is one that merits some special consideration, that let's sit tight as far as the rate increase that will go into effect now for this year, and review where we're at. If there is some fair method, yes, there will be a rate increase. I think you folks acknowledge that. But it's a matter of what is fair relative to your usage compared to other industrial users. So I've reached out to Councilwoman Mantee, and I spoke to a couple others of you in the council about this. So I would like to see us consider that we do defer their rate increase for the time being and take a closer look at it and see if there might be a fair, more equitable way to assess their usage.
All right, thank you. Councilwoman Mantee?
I just wanted to echo what Glenn said so that everybody knows where I stood on this, that it's worth looking into. And so basically what he said, I guess, pardon me, I would support it as well.
Okay, so then I'm expecting that we'll have some more meetings and review before, everybody else is seeing an increase for this year. If this passes, then Dakota Tube will be the only one that isn't, right? So we'll want to rectify that. Everybody agrees they haven't had an increased rate for 10 years. There's probably some rate of increase which is acceptable. We just need to arrive at what that is, and then we'll go back and make the adjustments.
I guess I would suggest that if you gentlemen would like to comment, you took the time to come here, and I appreciate that. If you guys would like to say anything on your behalf, you're more than welcome to.
One of these is okay?
Yeah.
Either one, okay. Sure. So thank you for Is that on now?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for taking the time to consider this. We initially brought this up with Glenn right when we got the notice of the increase, and we wanted to just make him aware and make you guys aware of what the impact to us was from an industrial user perspective. There are a number of different things that we thought weren't fair in the increase, and they're primarily related to the amount of pretreatment that we're doing with our water already, and the amount of treatment that has to happen to our water after it leaves our plant, which is nothing. It just gets mixed in with the rest of the city water. So most of the treatment is already done ourselves. So there's, I think that like our type of a category, what we were suggesting is that we just take a look at companies, not just Dakota, but companies like Dakota that are using a lot of water and returning a lot of water into the city treatment system, but pre-treated. And I'll answer any questions. I have a lot of information that I did in research about what our company does, how the water works, and I guess how comparable cities handle it.
All right. Council, any questions? Councilman Hoyer?
I guess with that, my question would be, if you're pre-treating it, are you putting it back into the sanitary sewer, or where's it getting pumped into when you say it's getting mixed back into Watertown's water?
So we have two separate streams. One is for our particular process treatment water, and then the rest is just our general sewage, like any business would have. So that type of water, the general sewage, from bathrooms and things like that, has to get treated. They meet in the same sewer though, sewer lines that go right back to the city water. That's probably a really good question for. It's a better question for the people that work in the city water treatment. But the reason we have separate line for our processed water is so that we can self-report what the characteristics of our water is. So.
It all goes into the sanitary sewer.
Okay, that was kind of my concern with it. It's a little challenging because we just talked about sump pumps, right? And what that does to our system and when we pump into it. I'm just curious, and maybe Mike can weigh in on this, are there alternatives for them if they've already got two separate lines and they're just connecting right now where it's pumping into the sanitary sewer? If this water's pre-treated, it seems a little redundant to treat it again as a city if there's another alternative that could be looked at so that maybe there is a prorate or a discount or something that could be put in place, because naturally, EPA and stuff, you probably would have to do all the processes you're doing with that used water, so I don't see why we're double tapping it to filter twice and clean twice or treat twice.
Right, although it's just like the sump pump water doesn't need to be cleaned, but we can't not clean it because once it's in the pipe, it's dirty. And so it gets the same transportation, pumping, and treatment as any other water, which is, Councilman Rademski?
That's probably a question for Mike. Is Dakota Tube the only company that pre-treats their water?
No, this is Mike Berger at Wastewater. I have Craig Mitchell, the assistant superintendent, with me here as well. No, there are, how many, Craig, have a pre-treatment out of the?
There are several others of the 14 that pre-treat their water before it's discharged.
Yeah. And the reason they need to do that is because they've got to get the water down to meet the local limits. The local limits, which are the concentrations that we could accept from the industries, are there, and those are developed technically to protect the wastewater treatment facility from pass-through or interference. So they're doing the pre-treatment because they need to pre-treat for us to even accept it here at Wastewater.
Okay.
To protect this facility.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Manty?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I support us looking into this further. I want to be clear that I don't believe there should be no increase. I believe that an increase is warranted, as the mayor said, with everybody else getting increased. There hasn't been one for a long time. What I'm in favor of is taking a look at a tiered system for the really large users as far as the impact on their budget and whether or not they have a chance to, I mean, it would be hard for anybody to have a significant increase in their bills overnight, essentially, without having any planning on that. So I still want to keep it, I guess my thinking on this is to keep it in the spirit of what we're trying to do here with getting our users' fees up to and closer to where they need to be overall, because we are behind on some of those things, and yet acknowledge that this is going to be a tremendous increase for this particular user. Dakota Tube is, looking to have this significant chunk. So by giving us a stall here and having a chance to look at it with a consultant, we have an opportunity to see what's going on in other communities and things like that. So that's where I'm at with it. I think we owe them a look at it. And I also know that they understand that there still would be an increase of some sort. So it's not a matter of not having them have an increase. It's a matter of how much and to what degree.
All right, thank you. Councilman Y.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a question on the utility side of things, the utilities department. When they have extreme usage for electricity and natural gas, do they have a tiered system? And so if we were to create a tiered system for something like this?
Right, I'm not sure if they do, but it's done. This isn't something we would invent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could certainly entertain doing that. Let's see. Councilman Hoyer?
I guess overall, the biggest thing to decide tonight is if we're going to keep them at their current rate. They'll be the only people that get that benefit, and then other folks are not receiving that same benefit, or if we keep them where they're at for now, relook at it with the committee and consultant, and then refund it if we see it's appropriate. I think it's just, the only concern I have is that it does seem to show a little bit of exceptionalism for one group versus everyone that's in that tier right now. No matter what, even the next user, it still affects their bottom line too, even if it's just a different scale. So I think that's the only major discussion point on it, is if we basically give a break on this for all of them, and then revisit it, of course, and then decide if it needs to come back up, or, vice versa.
So if we leave it as is, there will be billing. There'll be an extra billing in there somewhere to catch up for the rate increase that didn't occur, after you figure out what the reasonable rate increase is. And then that's charged above the 2020 rate versus what's written now, which is they stay at 2020 when everyone else goes to 2021 rates, and or give a refund if they were to stay with everyone else. So refund or billing.
Well, and that's kind of where it is, though. It's just, it seems like if we do this for one group, we need to do it for same process for the rest of them that are in this tier.
Yeah, understand that. Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. This question would be for Mike Berger. Mike, is there a difference in cost with this water coming into the wastewater, the fact that it's pre-treated at their facility? I think, if I'm not mistaken, EPA kind of requires that anyway, but is there a difference as far as the cost for you to clean that water if it comes from them pre-treated versus everybody else?
There's different from everybody else's. No, just the more we get, the more cost we have, because this water is pumped and it's transported through the facility. And of course, the more water you have, it can affect your aeration and a lot of different processes. So, but say that Dakota Tube waste is different than someone else's. No, I don't think that. I think Dakota Tube their wastewater, they're not being surcharged for high strength waste. They're simply being charged for the volume they're using on the costs that were developed by that cost of service analysis. So I don't think there's any difference between them and another.
Thank you, Mike.
They're using more, so they're paying more.
Right.
Thank
Councilman Rudemsky?
It's probably a question for Mike. They said Dakota Tube hasn't had an increase in the water rate in 10 years. Are there any other companies, or has nobody else had an increase in the water rate in 10 years?
No, and I would point out, we've been on about every 10 years, we've done a rate evaluation. So the 20% is really 2% a year over 10 years. And so there's many years that there was no increase for the last many years. And so, no, I mean, we could probably do rate evaluations more frequently and do them sooner, but that comes at a greater cost as well. And all those costs have to be recovered. So, but I would just point that out.
All right, thank you. Councilman Hoyer?
Well, I guess the question for the committee members that did this, I mean, the adjustment that we made, is it outlandish, or is this just, you're using what you're using and it just is what it is?
Mayor, I'll
Councilman
respond.
Billhauer.
You raise a good question, Michael. But I got to say, when we looked at this, if you recall a discussion that we had a couple months ago, we as a group actually got kind of hung up on the residential side of it, the sump pump variance and the rate increases there. I got to say, when we as a committee were going through this, and that's probably just my own fault, I don't recall having a whole lot of conversation, or at least not much that sunk in with me as far as what the impact was going to be on our industrial users. That we got bogged down in looking at the residential side of it. In my thinking, at least, that's why I think it's out of only fairness that, especially because of their usage compared to anybody else in that category, warrants another look at it to see if there's something more equitable.
Thank you. Heath, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I see Marcy's got her hand up too, and I was going to defer to her. We did, just for the council's information, we did research other communities' rates, and we actually had our consultant plug this amount of consumption, this 32 gallons per day, into those other communities' rates. And we found that we were, with our new rate, fairly comparable with a couple of those communities. I don't have that list right in front of me, so I apologize, but I believe Aberdeen and Sioux Falls were two of them that were very comparable to where our new rate would be for this exact same level of usage. And there were other communities that did fall significantly less than our rate, but they too, I don't think, have updated their rates in quite a few years. So we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples when we look at some of those communities. I just wanted to point that out too for informational purposes.
Thank you. Marcy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I same things as he said, but also want to add that, you know, we did have the discussion that Dakota Tubes water is pre-treated. Now, is there other options for them to reuse that water ahead of time? Is something that we can look into and help them with as well, from the DENR perspective of permitting and different things. But, you know, Ryan was on the meeting with us when we talked to Dakota Tube, and we do feel that the rates are fair and equitable for recouping the costs of what the wastewater treatment program is for the city of Watertown.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? Councilman Hoyer?
Do we know 10 years ago when we upped the rates, what did that look like? Was it close to 2% a year? Was it comparable to this, or? Because I'm curious if it's just sticker shock right now.
Mike,
yeah,
can you answer that?
Wastewater, yeah, it was about a 20% 10 years ago too, and so it's about the same 2% a year, roughly, about same ballpark.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, I will. Oh, go ahead, John.
So I think the reason that we're
could you guys identify yourself?
Yes, sorry. My name is John.
One of the media personnel that asked you to identify.
Sure. My name is John Steinbauer, president of Dakota Tube. This is Jason Murray, purchasing manager of Dakota Tube. There's a couple other things that that some of the rates that we're talking about, they're not as simple as they look, because when we consider certain things and comparing them to other communities, like, for instance, if we compare our wastewater treatment costs to a different community, you have to consider that some of them have combined utilities, public utilities, and so they'll charge a water rate and they'll charge a wastewater treatment rate. So it's like the cost of using a gallon of water is the cost of getting a gallon of water, and then also sending that gallon of water down the drain. So that has to be put in the analysis too. We can't just say that the wastewater treatment is comparable to other communities and not look at what the gallon of water costs in that community versus ours. That was one point. And then another reason that we were asking for this to be reviewed is it was a 20% increase. And when you bring up that what did the rate increase look like 10 years ago. I wanted them to look at the concept of compounding the interest instead of looking at the costs, allocating where those costs are incurred, and then allocating them fairly to the users. What's happening is that it's a 20% increase on an already higher number, so it's compounding the increases over time. So those are just two additional points that we wanted to be considered when we first met with Glenn.
Okay. Anyone else? I know it doesn't look like any hands are up. Doesn't show up on mine. Marcy, did you want to say something?
Sorry, no, my computer froze. I took my hand down now.
Oh, it wasn't showing up as being up on mine. Yes, okay, go ahead, John.
The last thing I just wanted to add was that our community, when I looked at the report from the consultant, he was comparing, our community separates industrial and commercial users for wastewater treatment usage, and the communities that he was comparing to didn't always do that. So some of they're using commercial rates and comparing to our industrial rates. So that was just another inconsistency in that consultant's recommendation that we wanted looked at.
Okay. All right. Councilman Lallam.
What is our options here? I mean, we can leave it as is, we can essentially halt it, or can we do it as a tier system?
Well, if you approve the motion that was made, then their rates will stay at the last year rates when everyone else's goes up, and then we'll look into it, make an adjustment, and send them a back bill for the difference. If you decline, if you vote down the resolution, then
they'll be with everyone else.
they'd be getting the same rate as everybody else, but you can still do some research and then give them an adjustment if their rate is reduced to pay them back essentially what they overpaid if the council decides to reduce their rate. Is that understood by everybody? Any questions before we vote? Did you have anything else?
Nope.
All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Okay, roll call vote, please, for the record.
Okay. Y,
Aye.
Billhauer,
Aye.
Roby.
He's recused.
Recused.
Oh, sorry about that. Rademski,
Aye.
Manti,
Aye.
Lallam,
Aye.
Hoyer,
Nay.
Bueller,
Aye.
Albertson.
Aye.
Kristen,
Motion carries.
Kristen. This is Councilman Holleen. I have arrived, and I vote aye.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. I should have noted that for the record when Councilman Holeen came in right at the beginning of this item. So you heard pretty much all of the discussion. So this carries, so your rate will be, if it's approved by the council at the next meeting, which it should, it's on the consent agenda. So there won't be any further discussion about it. If it passes, then your rate will be set back to the 2020 rate. And then we'll do some more discovery on it. So thank you for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda is approval of a professional services agreement for services related to monthly updates, support, and technical assistance for the Geographic Information System, GIS, with First District in the amount of $20,070, authorizing the mayor to sign all applicable documents.
So moved.
A motion by Lallam and a second by Y. I think Josh went first. And I'll ask Keith to tell us about this one as well.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is our annual contract with First District Association of Local Governments. It is to provide Public Works Department services that pertain primarily to the community development function of Public Works. That's helping us with planning and zoning and GIS mapping and the data needs that go into our GIS maps. First District helps, for example, provide monthly meeting data needs. You know, we have meetings every month regarding development and preliminary plans and plats and zoning and things of that nature. And First District helps keep those records updated in our mapping system. They also help with the land record management system and continually provide information like that throughout the year for this service fee amount. This fee of $20,070 is identical to what we paid last year. Not proposing any rate increases this year at all. And otherwise, pretty routine agreement, and stand by for any questions.
All right, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Now I see Marcy's hand is up, and I'm sure that's probably frozen in there.
It is frozen. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all right. Okay. No one else? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item B is approval of a professional services agreement with First District for services related to the development and hosting of the City County Geographic Information System, GIS, website in the amount of $4,500, authorizing the mayor to sign all applicable documents. Have a motion by Lallam.
Second.
A second by Rademski. And Heath, I'll let you tell us about this one too.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Again, this is with First District, an annual contract. We've been holding with them for, I guess, I don't know how many years, quite some time now. This one is specific to their web-based services. First District hosts a website that provides city and county GIS data for the public to access and utilize throughout the year. And this $4,500 contract that the city executes is our portion of helping fund those services to the county and city residents. It looks like, let me look here, trying to look at the other cost share. The cost share partners for the website services include Cottington County, municipal utilities, Watertown Development Company, and the city. Those are the four partners in hosting that website through First District. Our share is $4,500. The county's looks like $3,100. Municipal utilities at $1,500, and Watertown Development Company at $900. And so those are the financial splits for each partnering contributor to these services. With that, stand by for any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions, Council? Councilman Lallam.
Heath, is this the same amount as it was last year as well?
Yes.
Thank
Correct.
you.
Anyone else? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Okay, item C is the presentation on conflicts of interest and ex parte communication by our city attorney, Matt Roby, and no action on this, just going to give us a refresher. So go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to see if I can get my screen to share here correctly. Just 1 second. What did that do?
Yep, we can see it.
You can see the slideshow?
Yep, beautiful purple.
Right. So I gave a similar presentation on, I guess it was November at the Plan Commission meeting. And Councilman Vilhauer had asked if I give this presentation to the council as well. So essentially, you know, with the Board of Adjustment Plan Commission, ex parte communications are more important to consider because all of their actions, as I said, as the Board of Adjustment, are considered quasi judicial. But I'm going to touch on ex parte communication here, but the primary focus of the presentation is on conflicts of interest. So just a quick overview, the legislature has created multiple different ways to ensure that actions of all sorts of organizations and agencies and local governments are free of conflict. A few of them, just for example here, the statements of financial disclosure that council members are required to file, as well as the mayor, campaign finance disclosures that we recently enacted that of course has already been already required at the state level, and we recently chose to enact it at the local level. There's a list of incompatible offices that there's a few called out by statute, but mostly that's been over the years. The Attorney General has weighed in on various offices that would be incompatible for a council member or various office holders to hold at the same time. There's some language in statute about if you happen to own a business that intends on bidding on city contracts or that sort of thing, there's certain protocols that have to be followed. But today I'm just going to focus on the conflicts of interest that arise most frequently as the board, as the council considers its week-to-week agenda items. So in 2005, the Supreme Court adopted I believe it was, if I remember right, it was New Hampshire or Michigan, I can't remember. It kind of went through a discussion about how different states have characterized different types of conflicts of interest. And the Supreme Court in 2005 adopted these four categories of conflicts of interest. And they are the direct pecuniary interest, the indirect pecuniary interest, direct personal interest, and the indirect personal interest. Direct pecuniary interest is when you have a direct financial interest in the outcome of a decision, whether that could be a loss or a gain, depending on the outcome of the decision. The indirect pecuniary interest is when you maybe have a family member or a close friend or an employer who would benefit or be harmed directly financially based on the outcome of a decision. The next two are personal interests. Direct personal interest is when, again, a family member or close friend would be harmed or benefited in a non-financial way. And indirect personal interest is when maybe an organization you belong to, such as the Elks Club, is going to benefit from some action or inaction by the council. Now, after the court adopted these four categories and essentially said that basically if you've identified yourself as falling into any of these four categories, you more or less need to recuse yourself. And our good friend Senator Lee Schoenbeck jumped into action that immediately following legislative session and said, wait a second, indirect personal interest is going to basically require the city councils in the state of South Dakota to recuse themselves from every action they need to take. So in the 2005 legislative session, Lee Schoenbeck introduced legislation, and it was ultimately adopted and signed by the governor. And it's the statute that's here in front of you. And essentially, what it boils down to is if you have a direct financial interest, you are required to recuse yourself. If you have any of the other three types of interests that were identified by the court, you should think through them as they apply to you. Consider whether or not you can be impartial, but regardless, you need to make them known, but you don't need to recuse yourself unless, that second bullet point there, unless 2/3 of the governing body decides that, hey, we've considered your direct personal interest in this matter, and we don't feel that you can be impartial. And so essentially the bright line rule is if you have a direct financial interest, it requires recusal. If you have a direct personal or indirect financial or indirect personal, it requires, it's more nuanced, I guess I would say. Requires you should disclose it to the board, and then you should make a decision on your own whether you personally feel you can be impartial. If you don't feel you should be impartial, recuse yourself. If you do, but your fellow council members disagree with you, they can force you to recuse yourself if you've identified that interest. And then one other piece that as I'm talking here, I forgot to mention, I'm thinking of my cousin Don, that statute also does require any holder of an alcoholic beverage license to recuse themselves from all issuances and renewals of alcoholic beverage licenses. That's another bright line rule as far as the conflicts of interest go. I'm gonna stop there a second. Did that bring up any questions?
Councilman Roby has a question.
Matt, you may be addressing this, but at some point, just for the fact that we're covering this conversation, make a distinction between abstaining from a vote and recusal.
Well, there's no that I'm aware of. That hasn't been distinguished. There's not a lesser level of. You can't say I'm just going to abstain from the vote, but recuse myself from participation in the discussion. You can abstain if you don't believe you have enough information to make a decision. I mean, there's that type of abstention, but if you've identified a direct financial interest, or your fellow board members have identified an interest and they vote 2/3 to force you to recuse yourself, you cannot participate in discussion and you can't vote. And ideally, you would have to step down from the dais during that portion of the discussion. But as abstention, of course, you could do that at any time if you felt like there was an action you were considering, you didn't have enough information to take. If you were concerned about the political ramifications, you could abstain. Did that answer your question, Don?
It does. I'll just put that in my words. If you're recusing yourself, you're out. You don't discuss, you don't vote, you're done with the topic. On abstaining, you can participate as much as you want. You just decide not to vote at the end. I mean, just to oversimplify it.
Yeah, no, that's right. You're right. Yeah, you could, if you come into a vote or you're participating in the discussion and for example, the question is called and you were one of the dissenting votes to call the question, you might decide to abstain because you felt like it needed more discussion. You're not ready to say yes or no. So yeah, absolutely. That is a distinction there.
Councilman Lallam?
Matt, on that one, if 2/3 of the council feels that you need to recuse, is that something they could do after the fact, or like something came to light after a vote? I'm just throwing out hyperbole.
No, the intention would be that you would disclose. So the agenda item comes up, for example, and you say, Chair, I just want to disclose that I'm a member of the Elks, and this is a consideration for some nonprofit funding for the Elks, but I don't feel like I'm going to be impacted. I don't intend to recuse myself. At that time, the board could disagree with you. Somebody could make a motion to force you to recuse yourself, and then it would be voted upon. And if 2/3 of the board decided that you couldn't be impartial, you would be forced to recuse yourself.
Okay.
Now the other thing, that disclosure is highly encouraged. The other reason for that is if it's a contentious issue and there's an applicant or an interested party in the audience, if you disclose and don't feel like you need to recuse, the board doesn't think you need to recuse, and the interested party doesn't object to your non-recusal, potentially in a future lawsuit, their failure to object after your disclosure could be deemed as a waiver of their concern over your conflict.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Matt, you probably know that I recused myself from a couple agenda items just a few minutes ago. Was this recusal appropriate? I sit on the board of directors for First Planning District. I didn't disclose that, but I did recuse myself. Is that a situation where I should be recusing myself? Because this will come up every year as long as I'm on the council and also on the First Planning District board of directors.
Well, under the statute, it would not require recusal. because you don't, presumably you don't have any sort of financial interest. You just sit as a board member. But if you don't believe you can be impartial, then there's no reason you shouldn't recuse. Now it's, in some respects, there's that appearance of impropriety, and so I think as a board member, it's probably appropriate. But if you soul search and decide that you don't feel like you're being conflicted, I would say that you could kind of make that judgment. But it's probably always better if you're questioning it. It probably means you should recuse.
Okay.
Is a good test. Just
Thanks,
by
Matt.
nature of questioning it, probably means you should recuse.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, continue on.
Okay. Next piece here is just about ex parte communications. Now, what is an ex parte communication? Essentially, it's just communication between an interested party and a decision maker relating to the merits of a pending decision made outside of the official channels of the proceedings. So, examples are, if you get a phone call or you get an email on a pending decision. When does it become an issue? It becomes an issue when and if the council is acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. Now, almost all actions of the council are legislative in nature, meaning they set out a future course of conduct. They're not adjudicating a dispute. They're not setting out a decision based on current facts and current law. However, there have been a couple of Supreme Court cases with some language in the dissent that leads me to think conservatively that if licensing, for example, our alcohol permitting and other permits we issue as a city, could probably be construed as quasi-judicial. I don't have a yes or no answer on that at the moment, but in the interest of being conservative, if there is a licensing or permit question in front of the council, you should be cognizant of ex parte communications. Now, what if it happens? So if you get into one of these situations, what if it happens? Again, disclose prior to the hearing in the presence of the board and the public and on the record. Does it require recusal? If the communication is invited, so for example, if you took it upon yourself to call an applicant or interested party, or if you decided to go visit a site that might be under some sort of consideration, you should recuse yourself. If it's uninvited, again, this is that gray area where you have to decide whether or not what you've learned outside the presence of the rest of the board and the public, if you have to decide if what you've learned or if the nature of the communication was such that you don't feel like you can be impartial any longer. Or if you ask me and I say it seems pretty fishy, you should probably recuse yourself. That's another instance. But again, there's not most everything the city council does is legislative, but on those two types of considerations, permits and licensing, erring on the side of caution, I would treat those as quasi-judicial when it comes to ex parte communications. So just be on the lookout for that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, virtually everything that the Board of Adjustment does is quasi-judicial in nature, variances and conditional use permits. And so keep that in mind as in your role on the council. Keep in mind that you shouldn't be reaching out to those board members lobbying. For example, if a constituent contacts you that has a question in front of the Board of Adjustment, it would be inappropriate to reach out and lobby the Board of Adjustment on an action via ex parte communication. So keep that in mind as well. That's all I have. Any questions on the ex parte communications?
Does not look like it. Thank you. Councilman Vilhauer?
Matt, I got a question for you, because I know that comes up fairly frequently. I mean, we as a body of 10 people, we quite often will bounce up, questions off each other, as far as what your thoughts are on a particular issue, outside of a council meeting, in small groups of, 2, 3, 4, whatever. Is that okay?
Yep. Again, almost all those issues you're discussing are legislative in nature. So you think about your legislators, for example. There's lobbying that gets done on a day-to-day basis. All those types of discussions they're forward-looking. You're going to maybe approve a contract, or you're going to approve a project, or you're going to approve an ordinance. All those things lay out a course of future conduct, so they're legislative, and so therefore those communications are completely appropriate, as long as the issue is legislative. Now, if you get into one of those two areas I mentioned, I don't expect you're probably talking a whole lot about alcoholic beverage licenses, but if you ever find yourself doing that and pertaining to a particular applicant for a license, yes, I would be cognizant of that and refrain from those communications outside of the realm of the council.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Yep.
All right. Looks good. Is that it then, Matt?
That's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I'm sure the council does as well. So good to have a refresher now and then. Okay, moving on. The next item on the agenda is old business. Do we have any old business? Councilman Villar?
I've got a question, because it was about exactly this time of the year, roughly within a day or two probably, of when there was the tow truck driver killed on the South Highway 20 bypass. We renamed that Dale Jones Memorial Highway. But there's also conversation, I thought I recall at that time, about putting some kind of memorial marker out there. Whatever's become of that part of the discussion?
Heath, can you shed some light on that?
Yes, absolutely, Mayor. I have not been approached yet. There was a second party that was involved with the monument. There was an actual marker or a monument that they wanted to install there somewhere along the route, potentially near the intersection of Highway 81 and the South Bypass. The people that wanted the roadway designation and the signs put up was one group, and then there was kind of a second group that was going to reapproach the city with the memorial, and that has not surfaced back my direction. I haven't heard anything more from them on that, so I'm not sure if it fell silent due to whatever factors may be, but I just haven't heard anything further on it.
So the ball's not in our court on that, is what you're saying, Heath. So that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Is there any other old business? Is there any new business? Oh, zipping right along here. We do not have a reason to go into executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2. And there being no further business, I hereby declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.